Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the narrative building up around the upcoming Labour budget, which some are saying sounds very much like an austerity budget. This is because various senior Labour figures are going out of their way to talk about tough decisions, a painful budget. Starmer himself, in a speech yesterday, warned that they would have to deal with the unexpected £22 billion black hole straight away. And all this talk of, difficult decisions, painful budget, inevitably gets people thinking in terms of, oh, you're going to make loads of cuts. That would be austerity. However, if you look at what Starmer, Reeves and others have not only been saying, but doing, that doesn't seem likely. Of course, nobody outside the team working on the budget will really know until it's published and analysed. But let's first of all make sure we know what austerity means. It means overall spending goes down. In this regard, austerity for a government is the same as it is for a household. So if Reeves presents a budget where overall public spending has gone down in order to fill in this black hole, it is an austerity budget regardless of the justification made. However, let's look at what's been happening. First of all, Labour have immediately moved to announce above inflation pay rises for public sector workers. Pay represents a significant chunk of public spending. So above inflation increases, with some being well above inflation, represents a serious increase in public spending. We also know that Labour have begun moves on their National Wealth Fund, GB Energy, things like that. These represent new money. In order for the budget to end up being accurately described as an austerity budget, there would have to be a lot of spending cuts in other areas to compensate for that. But then there's the other side of the calculation, taxes. Although Labour haven't said anything in detail, absolutely everybody is expecting Labour to increase taxes. Now, the Tories are crying foul, saying, oh, Labour said they wouldn't raise taxes during the election campaign. Powerfully untrue. As I've kept saying, the very first page of Labour policies in the manifesto, you can check it out yourself, it's page 10, it's the first page where there's any policies. There are 3 specific tax rises: VAT on private school fees, wider application of the windfall tax on oil companies, as well as raising the rate of it and closing down tax avoidance schemes. All of these represent tax increases, and they all represent tax increases on the wealthy. What Labour ruled out was increases to national insurance, VAT and income tax specifically, and they also ruled out increasing taxes for ordinary workers, which they defined as people on low to middle incomes. And when we look at the tax rises we're expecting, this is in line with that promise. People are expecting Reeves to announce that capital gains tax will increase, probably in line with income tax. Now, the Tories today are going, oh, this is an assault on the middle class. They're going to squeeze the middle classes. Right, 3% of people pay capital gains tax. Now, there are some in middle class who will occasionally pay capital gains tax, right? Every now and then, they may have to pay. They may have a few thousand in capital gains. They pay tax on it. However, by bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax, those people would still not pay any more, because the people who get away with it at the moment are those who make effectively hundreds of thousands or millions in capital gains. That's not the middle classes. So anyone on a modest income who may be one of the 3% who from time to time pay capital gains tax, they'll still be unaffected by it. So this would be a tax move that would hit the seriously rich. There's talk of doing something with inheritance tax as well. Who knows what? But again, only 4% of people pay that. And it's entirely possible that they could reform inheritance tax in a way that those upper middle classes who will pay some will still not pay more under any new changes. It's possible they could focus those changes on. It's like the super rich who get away without paying inheritance tax at all to focus on, really. And then there was a line in Starmer's speech yesterday. He said, and I quote, "We have no other choice, given the situation that we're in. Those with the broader shoulders should bear the heavier burden." The emphasis on the tax burden shifting upwards. So in terms of what Labour have already done in government and what they're strongly hinting at, we basically know they're going to do, what we're seeing is more taxes being raised, which means that you can afford this new money without having to cut back in other areas as much, although we do know there are some cuts. So that means more money for the government to spend, more spending commitments being made, including public sector pay. And at this point, you're thinking, where's the evidence that there will be an austerity budget at all? The fact that there are individual cuts in some areas, such as the winter fuel allowance, is not austerity. Austerity is when overall spending is cut. All governments cut spending in some areas, even when spending overall is massively increased. You know, I want spending on rich Tory scroungers cut back quite severely, for example. Is anyone going to call it austerity if we cut back on private contracts? You know, far too much of our taxes goes on the idle rich, really. So, given what we've seen and what we've heard, is there any possibility that the budget could still be an austerity budget? Well, mathematically, there is one way it could be. The budget as presented by Jeremy Hunt this spring was, as we now know, dishonest. When Rachel Reeves made her speech last month, she revealed that there were things hidden from Parliament and the public. The Office of Budgetary Responsibility have taken the matter seriously enough because they've seen the documents now and they've written to the Treasury to ask them why they concealed things from them for the spring budget when the Tories were in power. The Institute for Fiscal Studies are also looking at this and going, hang on a minute, the Tories actually have hidden a net £22 billion black hole from everyone, just as it's not just Rachel Reeves saying it. And we already knew there was a similar size shortfall in spending plans beforehand. Like during the election, various economists were saying that the government, whether Tory or Labour, would have to raise taxes or say where the spending cuts were going to come from. You know, and that's why I think some people think this £22 billion black hole, it's, oh, you already knew that because they talked about that before the election. No, that was a different one. There's two, basically. There's the gap between the budget the Tories presented and what was needed to maintain spending. They just waved their hand and said, oh, we'll make a load of cuts. And then there's this actual black hole, which no one knew about. Well, the Tories knew about it. The Treasury knew about it. But the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, when it came up with its report for the budget, did not. And we can fairly confidently say Labour were probably planning on raising the taxes rather than implementing more cuts. But Labour would have already planned for that without knowing about this £22 billion. So that is genuinely new to them. So here's where there is a question mark. What Rachel Reeves has to do is increase the revenues the Treasury has available by more than the £22 billion above what they knew they already needed. If she does that, spending will be higher overall, and it's not austerity. Because if you can raise enough to fill the hole and have more left over, then that more left over will, of course, be spent. We obviously won't know the answer to that question until the end of October, but we can consider a few things. The first is that Labour will not want to be credibly accused of cutting spending. They've already ruled out austerity. You know, I don't know how many times they have to say, no, we're not going to be going down the austerity road. It's been really clear from polling over the last couple of years, though, that people want the public investment even if taxes had to go up. It was a message the Tories ignored to their cost. Makes no sense for Labour, especially as that feeling will be much more pronounced amongst their voters, to ignore the same message. So why are Starmer and Reeves always banging on about a painful budget then? Very probably as a way of emphasising just what a mess the Tories have left the country in, so that they can also emphasise what a good job they did in a few years when they can point at the much better state of things. In the here and now, Reeves does have options to fill in that £22 billion black hole and still be able to say that overall spending is going up. It doesn't even have to just come from tax rises. Again, another thing Starmer said yesterday, it's quite correct. Many economists have all said the same thing. You know, there are other levers as well. People always think in terms of tax and spend. There's lots of mucking about with assumptions and definitions, which will help as well. The financial news over the past month or so has been full of ways in which eminent economists have suggested Reeves could give herself more headroom without breaking any manifesto promises. And very few of them require her to even raise much more in the way of taxes. So although we'll have to wait and see, to be certain, I think the talk of pain from Labour is mostly about not letting the public forget the Tories left the country in ruins, and to make the restoration seem like a much bigger boon when it happens, basically. There will be disappointing news, don't get me wrong, in the budget. I've no doubt about that. I think there'll be plenty for me to be unhappy about. But I think there are almost certainly going to be three features which are good. First, overall spending, I think, is going to go up. Second, I think that spending will be aimed much more at where it's needed, because that's what we've seen so far, including on who it's needed. We've already seen it. Public sector worker pay. You know, actually, although the winter fuel payments causing consternation, they're increasing it by 50% on the most vulnerable. And 3, that the extra tax has been raised will be on those who can most afford it. And the other thing about those extra taxes being raised is if that does the job and that fills in that black hole this year, right, those taxes are still in place for next year, which unlocks much more spending. And again, there's not much speculation here. Basically, Starmer essentially said yesterday that the tax rises will be on those with the broadest shoulders. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.